Hi, this is Nancy McCammon Hansen. I am the co-convener of the Fort Wayne Area League of Women Voters. And this edition of Policy Matters is going to be the first of several that we do over the next few months about issues that impact women and families. This month we're going to be talking about domestic violence, and I have two staff members from the YWCA of Northeast Indiana with me today, and I'd like them to introduce themselves.
This is Jennifer Rolfe, and I'm the Community Education Coordinator at YWCA.
This is Mary Jo Hardiman. I'm the Chief Program Officer for YWCA Northeast Indiana.
And you're hearing this in the month of November, but we are recording this in October, and this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Could one of you please explain what this is?
Sure. So throughout the month of October, we do different activities to raise awareness of the impact that domestic violence has in our community, whether that be education. We've done a lot of educational programs around town and around our service area, and also some arts activities too, where we've incorporated sidewalk chalk to do things like chalk it up. We have had some dance performances, we've had some poem readings, just all sorts of different ways to express the impact that domestic violence is having in our community. And so all throughout October, YWCAs and organizations around the country try to do activities to raise awareness around that issue.
Okay, great. Just as a little bit of self-disclosure, I used to work at the YWCA also, and one of the things that I think everyone should know is that Fort Wayne has the oldest domestic violence shelter in the state of Indiana. It was first built in 1976. There have been some additions to that shelter and to the programs that the YWCA does. And coming up on December 1st, there's going to be a major fundraiser for the domestic violence services that the YWCA offers. We'll talk more about that later. Right now, Mary Jo, I'd like you to talk a little bit about statistics before we talk about domestic violence in general. One of the things that I'm wondering about is how have the numbers of clients served at the shelter varied in the last couple of years? Have they gone up? Have they gone down?
Sure. So our numbers have increased every year for the past 2.5 years. We actually have been over capacity in our 45-bed shelter for those 2.5 years. So we have 45 beds, and we have averaged about 66 women, children, and male victims in our shelter. So those numbers have been going up significantly each year. Right now, we have answered over 7,000 calls for help in 2016, and that's a marked difference. In 2012, we answered over 3,000 calls. So to go from 3,000 calls to 7,000 calls, it kind of explains that uptick in those that we're serving. In 2016, we served 513 adults and 384 children in our shelter, and that actually was over 21,000 bed nights that we provided safe shelter for victims in Northeast Indiana. So as we see those numbers go up, we also see the expenses go up. We have seen at least a 10% increase in what it takes to operate the shelter over those 2.5 years. Not alone do we just have shelter, we also have our outreach program, and we have also seen those numbers significantly increase over the past few years. And in 2015, we served almost 200 victims out in the community. These were folks that did not need safe shelter at the time, but they needed other help, for instance, navigating the legal system, getting a protective order, getting some emotional support, just different things to help them as they make choices for a safe future. So as those numbers have crept up, that means that we've had to do more to meet that need. And in addition to that, sometimes what we don't think about in terms of statistics is what is that actual cost to our community. And we have different researchers that study this all the time, and we've seen those costs go up. And right now, the cost of domestic violence here in the United States is $5.8 billion, and 4.1 of that is just for medical and mental health services. services. So we see what the cost is. We also know that employers are feeling domestic violence in their pocketbooks, because last year we lost 8 million days of lost work, which if you look at the economics of that, that's $1.8 billion of productivity loss. So that's on a national scale. And when you focus that back into Northeast Indiana, you can see how that does impact our economic development right here in Fort Wayne.
Now, does the YWCA get any monies from tax dollars, or is it all through grants and donations?
We are funded through Indiana Criminal Justice Institute. That's one of our major funders for our domestic violence programs. And that money actually comes from different charges when it comes to the court system. So every time, for example, a divorce is filed here in Allen County, a little bit of that money goes right into that pool of Indiana Criminal Justice Institute funding, and that helps provide for safe shelter for victims of domestic violence. Also, we receive individual donations, corporate sponsorships. We are a partner agency of the United Way in all 6 counties, and we also rely heavily on the signature fundraiser that's coming up on December 1st.
Okay. So let's move on to some more specific questions. Can you explain what domestic violence is in general?
And with that, it can encompass so many things. So when you break down those words, domestic violence, the violence is any kind of harm that is happening to somebody. And often that harm is being done for power and control. With that domestic piece, we're talking about people who often share a household together. And so that could be spouses, it could be even parents to their children, it could be anybody that might share a household, has some kind of intimate relationship together. And so with domestic violence, it's any kind of harm that's happening to people who are intimate partners, who have some sort of relationship together. And I think so often people hear domestic violence and automatically their thoughts go to physical abuse, hitting, punching, slapping, things of that nature. And while those are definitely types of abuse, it's not the only way that it happens. It's one piece of it. And so with domestic violence, it definitely can encompass many things such as verbal, emotional, financial abuse, so many other categories.
Okay, and I know there's a common misconception that it's always men abusing women, but that's not necessarily true, correct?
Correct. And so anybody could be a victim of domestic violence. Anybody could experience it. And so men definitely do experience domestic violence as far as being the victim of abuse where someone is abusing them. And women definitely can be the abusers in those situations. I think a lot of those stereotypes come from just our conceptions of what we think of with men and women, where we have a lot of stereotypes of what we think it means to be a man or what we think it means to be a woman. And so the problem with those stereotypes is then, especially when a man is being abused, it's a lot harder for them to feel comfortable coming forward. They think, who's going to believe me? Who would I talk to? Nobody would actually help me in this situation, because we always focus so much on that assumption that domestic violence is men abusing women, but it definitely can go both ways.
Okay. Now, kind of along those lines, you were talking about the different kinds of abuse. My husband and I were watching television the other day, and there was a show on, and he made the comment, that guy ought to be in jail because he was abusive of his spouse, but he was not physically abusive. It was financial and mental abuse.
Right.
So I know that for physical abuse, you can be arrested, but my response to him is if you're a jerk, there's no law against being a
Right.
jerk. So if you are a victim of, say, financial abuse where your spouse or your significant other denies you access to your money, what can you do?
And so a lot of the things that we do when we're working with any client that we serve is trying to get a plan in place. And so if it is something where they're not able to access their accounts, or where they're even having to give an allowance to the abuser of their paycheck, or whatever that might look like, we will make a plan in place so that hopefully that person can start to gather some funds on the side to secure them a safe way to exit the relationship if it's something that they do choose to do. So that is definitely one piece of it. And there's also resources in the community where we can work with banks. Sometimes we can work with different organizations to try to set those those things up so that that individual can't access their money once again. But it is tricky because there are some legal things that have to be overcome, some definite hoops to jump through to be able to change those things, especially when that control's been there for a long time. When maybe the abuser is the only one with their name on the bank account. Maybe even the victim of abuse isn't able to work anymore because the abuser won't allow them to leave the house. Those situations definitely can become very difficult if you're really starting with nothing as far as any financial means to leave the relationship. And so we're definitely going to work with that individual based on their individual situation.
Okay. We've talked a little bit about some different kinds of abuse. Any others that you'd like to elaborate on?
I'd want to elaborate a little bit on the new law that changed here in Indiana on July 1st in regards to domestic violence. So on July 1 of this year, we had a little bit of a change within the law. And right now, if you are going to commit domestic battery, the police can arrest you if you touch or batter somebody in a rude, angry, or insolent manner. And the change with this is it used to be you had to complain of pain or have an injury for that arrest to be made. And now you don't have to complain of pain. So that is a significant change when it comes to specifically physical abuse. The other thing that got added to that, and we used to see this all the time working with women in the shelter, is they would say, he never laid a finger on me, but he spit on me. Okay? And a year ago, if they spit on you, you wouldn't have been charged with domestic violence. But if you would have spit on a police officer, you would have been picked up for battery by bodily waste on a police officer. So with that new law, if an abuser spits on a family member or releases any type of fluid in a violent manner towards a victim, that now can be arrested and charged for domestic battery here in the state of Indiana. So that's just within physical violence, and then that doesn't even get into all of the sexual violence that goes on. And sometimes I think that there is a misconception that rape and sexual assault is a separate category, but we see it all interlinked with the physical violence. And more oftentimes than not, if there's physical violence going on, there's also the sexual violence that's going on towards the partner. And we are seeing an uptick in the intersection of domestic violence and sex trafficking, human trafficking within partners, so much so that an abuser will traffic out his wife or his partner. And then what happens is sometimes he will force her to then traffic other ladies here in Fort Wayne. So that is something that we're really having to work against within the sexual violence realm.
Okay. You've talked about probably, I guess in my eyes, the worst of abuse. But is it possible to see abuse coming? Does it escalate? Or does it just all happen all at once? I think people need to have an understanding of that.
And so with domestic violence, it's definitely something that it's not always occurring within the relationship. There are lots of good times. And as you talk with anybody that has experienced domestic violence, they'll often tell you, especially towards the beginning of the relationship, things were really good. They were really happy, and it might have taken a while before some of those abusive behaviors started to come up. But then over time, those abusive behaviors often start to build and become more aggressive, more often, more frequent, more extreme, and so they definitely can build up over time. But then again, eventually there might be another calm. And so that's something that we talk about with the cycle of violence. If there's this calm phase where everything seems okay, there might be a lot of apologizing, a lot of promises made, and that can often convince someone that maybe their abusive partner is going to change, or maybe this is the last time it's going to happen, so they give them another chance. So with domestic violence, it definitely is something that can be tricky to identify when you see that cycle playing out, where you assume that calm, happy time period is what's going to continue on. And with domestic violence, there definitely can be some warning signs towards the beginning, but it can be hard to see them because as being a human being, we are sometimes clouded by our emotions to see what's really happening. Or maybe that person is becoming jealous, or controlling of friendships, controlling of time, where they don't want that partner to spend time with family and friends. And it might be an excuse of, well, I just want to spend time with you, which seems nice at first, but then it starts to become that isolation where family and friends start to get pushed out of the situation, where they are not able to provide that support anymore because they're not really present in that individual's life. And so there are lots of things like that can come up, or even the checking up on their partner excessively, where they want to read through text messages on the phone, read through their call list of who they've been talking to, just to really make sure they always know what's happening in their partner's life, which then can make it hard for that partner to ever find time to be able to get away because they are being tracked by their abusive partner. And so those overly attentive behaviors can definitely be red flags for an unhealthy relationship.
Okay, so an unhealthy relationship does not necessarily end with physical abuse. It can go on for years with financial or emotional abuse. I remember a conversation I had a number of years ago with somebody who was talking about a woman in our community, and I said something to the effect that, well, her husband's an abuser. And this was before I ever really knew much about domestic violence. And she looked at me and she said, oh, no, he's not. And I said, what you're describing that he's doing with his wife sounds like abuse to me. Now, we won't go into details about that. But that woman who was being abused, I thought, had resources. Because of the way what her husband's profession was, how they lived, what they did in the community, but she never left. Now, this says to me that even if you have resources, you won't necessarily leave.
Right. There can be so many reasons why someone might stay in an unhealthy relationship. And so, sure, in some situations, money could be a factor where there aren't any financial resources, so that might be why they stay. But for others, it could be things like fear of, what if I leave and they find me anyways? Because often during the abuse, there are threats being made that if you do leave, I will find you and I will come after you. And so that fear of, at least if I stay, I know what they're up to. If I leave, I have no idea what this person is planning and what they're trying to do. So that fear could be a reason. It could also be just the beliefs about the relationship of, maybe if I help them, they'll change and they'll stop being abusive. So a lot of the time, the victim will take that responsibility on themselves of, maybe I can change this abusive person. And so that can often be a factor of why they stay, because they want to change them. It could also be that lack of support, the isolation, where over time friends and family have become frustrated with the situation and kind of pulled away. So then that feeling of loneliness of, I don't know where I would go, who I would turn to if I did leave, if I don't have anyone anymore. And as a human, we need that interaction of other people in our life. And so it can feel very scary to take that step of any kind of change. So those are just a few, and there are so many other reasons why someone might stay in that situation. It's different for everyone.
Okay. Yesterday, the YWCA had their October Diversity Dialogue. Yesterday was October 26th, and it was here at the library where we are recording this show. And one of the things that was discussed was having a safety plan. So can you explain what a safety plan is and how it works?
Sure. So a safety plan is important whether you're staying in the relationship or you're leaving the relationship. And a safety plan is a way to think about really every aspect of your life and how you can make sure that you're protecting yourself and your children from that abusive partner. And so if we first think about, if you leave the relationship, what might that safety plan entail? If you're going to leave the relationship, you have to think about things like, will I have my ID on me? Will I have my children's birth certificates? Because you might need those to qualify for services, to get resources if your abuser has cut you off financially. You might need things like an extra set of keys, an extra set of clothes, because you never know, am I going to sleep in my car? Am I going to sleep at the hotel? Am I going to sleep at the YWCA shelter? So you have to have your basic needs met. Also, you should be hiding whatever you can as far as extra change, extra cash, because you never know, well, I need to get the extra tank of gas to get me out of town. What am I going to need for my kids as far as lunch money goes? Just those really basic things you have to start thinking about if you're going to leave. And then you have to anticipate what might that abuser do. So if you're married and you know that that abuser has firearms in the household and you're going to get a protective order, you need to make sure that you talk to the police and to the courts about getting those firearms surrendered. You need to think about what are their other weapons that they have access to. With domestic violence, you see a lot of murders and suicide go hand in hand. So when that abuser starts calling you and saying things like, I think I'm going to kill myself, please come back to me, you have to think about yourself and your safety, and what would you do if that abuser says that they're suicidal. Other things that you have to think about are if you stay in the relationship and you're going to continue to live in that domestic violence household, what can you do to try to protect, again, yourself and your children? So victims have to play the game. If they're going to stay in that relationship and they're going to stay in that household, they have to anticipate ways to protect themselves. So sometimes that might be trying to keep the peace, giving in to different things that the abuser wants. Many victims have even said, if he wanted sex, I gave him sex because I knew that in a couple months I'd be leaving, but this was a way to keep the peace at the time and to protect me and my children from being battered. So there's different things you have to really think about. And right now in 2016, you certainly have to think about technology when it comes to safety planning. Back in the 80s, the 90s, even early 2000s, abusers would track a woman by feeling the hood of the car. You know, he would say, you can't go anywhere today. He'd come home, he'd feel the hood of the car. If it was warm, he instantly would say, where have you been? He also would use the odometer to track her mileage. And nowadays, they don't have to do any of that. All they have to do is go to one of these little spy places or even order online a little GPS chip. It's like a little magnet. You can put it right anywhere on a car. You can hide it. And then right from the abuser's cell phone, they can track every single place that you're going. So those are things that you have to think about. And actually, law enforcement can check your car to see if there has been a little GPS spy tracker put on your car. So you have to think about things like that. You have to think about your social media. People in their 30s and 40s and older, they're using Facebook all the time. So if you're in a violent relationship and you're on Facebook, you've got to think about that, because guarantee your abuser is trying to hack into your Facebook account. He's trying to figure out what you're doing next. And that's just the tip of the iceberg with technology. You really have to think about, could my abuser get into any of my accounts, any of my social media, and then you have to plan accordingly.
So yesterday, there was a speaker who had been a victim of domestic violence. She had left her abuser several times, and she talked about that situation. And one of the things that she talked about was documentation. Can you explain what kind of documentation you need to do to document, to tell the story about what is happening to you? Yeah, something that helps out a lot is if you get a calendar, whether it's a planner or just a month calendar, anything that has dates on it that you can actually start writing down right on the calendar when certain things would happen. So if you came out of work and your tires were slashed, you're going to put that down. If you got home and the abuser had locked you out of the house, you're going to write that down. The more you can tie it to dates, the more of a pattern we're going to see, especially if it gets into the court of law. Documentation is so key because law enforcement and prosecutors' office is always looking for holes in stories, what's different, what's changed. They're matching up police reports, they're matching up their interviews that they did, and they're also sometimes sending us subpoenas to get documentation. So the more that you can document specific to dates, how you were feeling, what was happening, what were your children doing, where were they at when the violence was occurring, it's so important. And then that way, if you do go on to get a protective order, you can paint at least 3 incidents
a picture of what's happened, and that will really allow the judge, the magistrate, to really see what kind of violence is going on in that household. Are you in danger? Are you in fear? Are there threats being made? Going back to, again, sometimes people think it's only physical violence. Even those threats you want to document. So anytime an abuser has sent you a text message and it's a threat or it's an accusation, you're going to want to hold on to your text messages, to your emails, any type of documentation. And if you can find a safe place to store this information, it's important. But if you don't have a safe place, that's something that we do. We are always collecting documentation from victims that we work with, and we actually can keep it at the YWCA where it is safe and you don't risk the abuser finding that documentation. It's also important to ask friends, family, co-workers to document what they see and hear. So if you do have any type of support system, the more that witnesses can document it, the more credible it's going to be, at least in the eyes of the court or for other systems that you might be working through because of the domestic violence.
So is a protective order worth it?
Absolutely.
Why?
It's worth it because it creates evidence that there is domestic violence going on. In addition, it does offer you some protection. So right now in the state of Indiana, if you were to file a protective order, your employer cannot terminate you. So that's a little bit of a change that just happened in 2015. And before that, employer could terminate you if you're a victim of domestic violence. Now, again, if you file that protective order, you at least have something for your workplace to hold on to your job. More importantly than that, though, your employer cannot change your hours. They cannot change your pay. They can't say, you're a victim of domestic violence, so I'm going to relocate you up to Kendallville versus Fort Wayne. You know, if you're working at a company that has multiple locations, it does offer you a little bit of protection when it comes to employment. It also offers you protections because instead of you having to leave the house, you can actually have within your protective order your abuser ordered to be evicted from your home. So that's something where you could actually hold on to your safe place, get your locks changed, maybe get a security system. There's all types of different systems nowadays where instead of always having to be the one on the run, you could actually stay in your home. You could actually ask for the abuser to pay for your attorney. You could ask them to pay for your counseling, things for your children. So it is worth it when you're trying to go up against somebody who may be trying to deplete you of every resource that you may have if you are able to have resources.
Okay. Let's move on to kids. When there are kids in a family where abuse is going on, how does domestic violence affect them?
Well, with that, anytime children are witnessing or are exposed in any way to domestic violence, it's teaching them things. It's teaching them what a relationship looks like. And with domestic violence, it's often a learned behavior where we learn it from what we're seeing, maybe the way that we're being raised, what's happening in the household. And so if children are growing up in an environment where domestic violence is happening to them or around them, they start to think that that's what they should expect in relationships, where that to them it might seem normal. Because that's what they're seeing every day. And so for some children, until they are in an environment where something is different, they might not know that it's not healthy. Or maybe the first time that child has realized that this is something that's unhealthy in their families when they go to a friend's house. They think, why is your family so calm? Because they see it so different from what they're growing up with and seeing every day. And so with that, when children are exposed to that constantly, then we sometimes see that children will repeat those behaviors in their own relationships down the road. Because that's the only way they know of how to be in a relationship, where they might become an abusive partner in the future or maybe become a victim of abuse in the future, just based on what they're seeing of their day-to-day. And so it definitely can have very negative impacts on children when they are witnessing those or even overhearing those types of behaviors.
So that can move into dating relationships also, right? And
Absolutely.
are you still doing work with in the schools with kids to teach them a little bit about healthy dating?
Yes, and so we do a program called Eyes Wide Open, and that is our healthy, unhealthy relationship program that we do with high school students. And so with this presentation, we go into classrooms and talk with youth about the difference of a healthy versus an unhealthy relationship. We try to help them understand what abuse really is and what it looks like, because once again, they assume it's physical only, that the other parts don't count with verbal and emotional and sexual. And then we also help them understand warning signs, how to stay safe, and then also what a healthy relationship looks like. Something that I have noticed as I talk with teenagers is so often the unhealthy stuff is normal to them. The healthy stuff is the stuff they don't understand. So when we start talking about what is equality, what is respect, sometimes they don't know. They've never actually experienced that. I remember one day, it's been a while ago now, I was having a conversation with students, and some students actually said to me, that doesn't exist. When we're talking about respect, trust, support, they said that's not real. And so we had to have a really in-depth conversation about that is possible, that you can respect a partner and someone can respect you back, and that is doable in a relationship. But for that individual, they had never experienced that, not from their family, not from their friends. And so it's really important for our young people that we're teaching them what a healthy relationship should be and what they deserve, and how to do that with other people.
Okay, I think we have a topic for another show now. How are same-sex partners legally affected by domestic violence?
Sure. So in 2013, we had the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women's Act, and that was under President Obama, which that actually allowed for protections for same-sex partners. And so in Indiana, you can be lesbian, gay, transgender, heterosexual, homosexual, however you identify, you have protections legally in the state of Indiana if you're a victim of domestic violence. So what that means is if you and your partner are in a domestic violence battery, the police have to treat you the same way as they would anybody else. And so this is a great step towards equality and to getting protections for same-sex partners. Are we all the way there yet? No, there still needs to be a lot of training and a lot of advocacy, but at least we have laws on the books now to protect gender equality and to also protect all relationships, whether they're current relationships, former relationships, for the LGBTQIA community.
Okay. We talked a little bit about domestic violence in relationship to your job. Okay. So, and I know that it can be a problem if an abuser shows up at a workplace, because other people who work there can also be targeted. But what about other kinds of relationships like family, friends, that kind of thing? How do abusers connect with those people in your life?
A lot of times the abuser will try a couple of different things. They will try to make the victim think that her family is walking out on her. So, for example, worked with a victim, and every time they would go over to her sister's house for the holidays, they'd have a great time, but as soon as they would get home, the abuser would start in talking about, how her sister really doesn't like her, and did you see the way that your sister looked at you, and did you see, and he just went on and on and on. What he was trying to do is he was trying to cut her off of her support system. So that's very common with what abusers try to do with family. With victims' friends, they try to get them to come to their side, because then that way what they can do is they can use her friends or his friends to stalk her and to get information. And a lot of times friends don't even realize the information that they're giving to the abusive partner, and you're really putting her more in danger. So within protective orders, it's always important that you do list other family members that you want the abuser to stay away from, because the abuser is always making a couple calls, especially when they go to jail. Usually that first call when an abuser goes to jail is to his mom, and then he's calling you, and then he's calling your family members, because he wants that situation changed. He wants to get back into that relationship with you. He wants to get that power and control. So they're always trying to play that game with family family members to try to make them think that the victim is crazy and really it's not them. So you really do need to think about your support system, and if you have anybody in your life that is a support to you, you really need to talk to them about what's going on, and then include them in your protective order, because maybe you're a victim who goes to your grandma's house, when things are going bad. Go ahead and put that on the protective order to try to keep that abuser away, both directly but also indirectly, away from your family and your friends.
Okay. In this election year, we're hearing more and more about how women are viewed and treated in our society, and this show is being taped before the election. But one of the things that has been popping up on Facebook quite a bit is the issue of self-esteem in women. And I think that's one thing that I really noticed yesterday in the talk. The woman who had been a victim of abuse, talked about really having to work on her self-esteem. So how does self-esteem play into being a victim of domestic violence?
Well, I would say that's something that the abuser definitely tries to destroy with the victim, especially with verbal and emotional abuse. There's constant put-downs and name-calling and trying to pick apart every flaw that the abuser can find in the victim to make the victim believe that this is what they deserve, that the treatment that they are receiving, they have done something to deserve that. And so they will constantly pick away at that person, and we're all vulnerable to that. All of us have our areas of weaknesses or even areas of insecurities where if someone taps into that enough, it can really start to take a toll on us, and we can start to think differently of, well, maybe I've done something to deserve this. And so that self-esteem piece is huge. Of as the abuser picks away at that, the victim might feel very lost, of not knowing what to do next. But that's also where you can help someone. I'm trying to build that self-esteem back up, whether that be the friends and family as a support system or even service providers, where they can definitely work with that individual to try to help them build that confidence and self-esteem back up so that they can feel good about themselves and who they are as a person, know that they deserve better than the treatment that they've been receiving. And so that self-esteem piece is huge, and it's something that it does take a long time to work through. It's not going to change overnight, especially when it's been maybe years of an abusive relationship. It can take a long time to help that person to build back up and feel confident enough to be able to walk away from the relationship, or just feel confident enough to leave the house for the day. I mean, it's something that definitely can take a long time to do. And there's just something about that emotional and verbal piece that it doesn't go away ever completely. It definitely doesn't go away quickly. And so I know when I've had conversations with individuals who have experienced dating violence or domestic violence, they're like, well, when am I going to feel better about this? And I don't know the answer to that, but it definitely does take some time. But we're going to be there to work and help every step of the way to try to build that self-esteem back up and help you to feel happy and confident once again.
So that really speaks to the need to not distance yourself from a friend or family member
Right.
who may be going through an abusive relationship.
Yeah, and that they definitely need that ongoing support.
Okay, we've talked about what the YWCA does, but there are a number of entities in this community that work with victims of domestic violence. And one of the resources that was mentioned yesterday in the Diversity Dialogue is the Allen County Domestic Violence Task Force. What does it do?
Yeah, so the Allen County Domestic Violence Task Force meets monthly here in Fort Wayne, and we really work hard to have a coordinated community response. And so what that means is we make sure that every sector of our community is involved in helping to eliminate domestic violence. Resources are provided through the Domestic Violence Task Force, and those resources are, if we first start with the legal end of it, we have the Volunteer Lawyer Program, Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic, and Indiana Legal Services. All of those are able to provide free legal help when you're experiencing a case like this. We also have Fort Wayne Sexual Assault Treatment Center, and so what they do is they provide both adult and child forensic exams anytime there there has been a sexual assault, rape that has occurred, and that is for free. And they also have the Jane Doe law, which is very important within the scope of domestic violence. So if you're 18 or over and you have been raped by your partner, you can go and have your exam, which is important for your own health care needs, but also you do not have to give the information at that time for any type of case with law enforcement or prosecution to begin. And so that's really important, because that way you do have that extra layer of protection, and then years down the road, if you do want to proceed with that case, then you can do that with Fort Wayne Sexual Assault Treatment Center. Also made up on the task force, we have some private attorneys, and then we also have all law enforcement. So we have the Allen County Sheriff's Department, we have Fort Wayne Police Department. Also through Fort Wayne Police Department, we have victims assistance, and then we also have the prosecutor's office involved, as well as Amani Services, which serves immigrants and refugees that have been victims of violence. And so what we do is we get together and we say, okay, what are we not looking at here in Fort Wayne that we need to really think about for victims? And then we work to come up with a plan to really remove those barriers. Also, we work with the Center for Nonviolence and their program, which they have the Batters Intervention Program, and they have been recognized around the world for their Batters Intervention Program. And what they do is they really work to help batters stop battering. And so a lot of times they say, okay, if the batter is arrested, the domestic violence is going to stop. No, we will never be able to arrest or police our way out of domestic violence. It truly is going to take change, and it's going to take that batter, that abuser, to change and not use power and control. So we also work with the Center for Nonviolence to make some movements and some strides within there.
Okay. Also, victims assistance, do they still collect cell phones?
They collect cell phones, but the YWCA also collects cell phones. And we also have a program called the Hope Line phone. And what the Hope Line phone is, it's for victims who, if they do not have a cell phone, we can provide a cell phone, and it has so many minutes and text messages so that you can have a link to your support system.
And this is a phone that your batterer will not necessarily know about, that you can keep hidden away, and he or she will not know that you own it. Correct. Okay.
Yep.
Great program. So if you've got a bunch of cell phones laying around, take them to the YWCA. Positive Resource Center was mentioned yesterday, and I'm not familiar with that. What is the Positive Resource Center?
Sure. So Positive Resource Center is actually the AIDS Task Force. They had a rebranding here last year, and so how we work with them is within domestic violence, it is very common for that batterer to actually have sex with somebody or share needles with somebody, often their partner, and they will facilitate that drug use and that sexual violence, and then you have a victim who has just contracted HIV or AIDS. And so where they play into the picture is they come and they provide free testing to all of our victims that would like it at the shelter or really in any of our programs. And then if there is a positive test that comes up, they're able to provide ongoing housing, food, resources for that person, because the treatment of HIV and AIDS is very expensive. So not only are you going through domestic violence, you just found out that you have a disease.
Okay. And does the Fort Wayne Community Schools have any programs for kids who are part of a household where there's domestic violence?
At the shelter, we actually bring Fort Wayne Community Schools in. We bring in two different programs. We bring in a tutor, Diane. She comes every week. She works with every student there to make sure that they're not lagging behind. Oftentimes, children have been moved 4, 5, 6 different schools within a school year because once that abuser thinks that the school system knows there's violence going on in the home, they instantly pull them out of that school system, and all of a sudden they're into a different school or a different school system. So we really work hard to help them with their reading and their math and just trying to catch them up to what's going on. And then we also work with the case managers in the homeless liaison program to ensure that every student has what they need in terms of clothes, school supplies, transportation, food, anything that they would need, because they are homeless because of the domestic violence.
Okay. And that speaks to those of us who are in that age bracket where we're downsizing. We probably have a lot of stuff we could get rid of, and somebody out there can probably use it. So you do take clothing and things like that. School supplies, I know you have a drive for that every year.
Correct.
What other kinds of things could people donate?
Sure. So one of our largest needs is diapers, pillows, socks, underwear. Those are things that are a luxury to people, believe it or not. And so when you have zero income and you are fleeing and you have children in tow, those are things that the YWCA provides. So any type of household items, basic hygiene items, things that you use on a daily basis, shampoo, conditioner, razors, deodorant, any of those things we need, because when you're helping over 800, 900 victims a year who come with nothing, that's a lot to provide in a short period of time.
Yes, it is. And so if you travel a lot, all those nice little bottles of shampoo and conditioner and soap and lotion that you get, swoop them into your bag and bring them back and take them to the YWCA. Okay, moving on. On December 1st is Circle of Women. And Circle of Women is the major fundraiser that the YWCA does every year. Can you explain a little bit about what it is and what the format is?
Sure. So this is our 20th year for Circle of Women, and so we're really recognizing those 20 years of what this fundraiser is, and it's a great program. What you'll do is, if you want to come, you can purchase a ticket, or you could purchase a table and invite your friends, and you'll come over the lunch hour to the Hilton here in Fort Wayne, and you'll get to hear a program about domestic violence. And it's really set up so that you can get in and get out and get right back to your job or to your volunteering that you're doing in the community. And so we do anticipate that we'll have people out on time, but it's really a way to learn more about what's gone on in 20 years here in Fort Wayne since the start of Circle of Women. You could have a table of 10 of your friends or your colleagues. The price is $120. Ask will be made at the luncheon. So you would just sign up, and then once you're there, there'll be a formal ask, and we do ask that everybody contribute that way, or you can even do more. And then that really goes right back into our domestic violence programming, and that's really how we operate the shelter, which costs over $600,000 a year to operate here in Fort Wayne. And this year, the speakers, again, we're doing something a little different, where we're looking back for the past 20 years, and then we're also looking ahead. So we have 4 different people that will be a part of that, and they are John Beams, who's with the Center for Nonviolence. He founded, along with his partner Beth Beams, the Center for Nonviolence in the early 80s, and he's really going to talk about what was he doing 20 years ago, and how has domestic violence changed, and what still needs to happen. We'll also have the prosecutor's office. We're going to have Kathy Maggart, and she is the felony domestic violence victims advocate. So Kathy handles felony cases all day. She listens to jail calls. She goes into the courts, and so she's going to talk about the past 20 years for the prosecutor's office. And then we have Rusty York, who has announced his retirement, but he's going to talk about his 20 years and more with law enforcement and what strides have been made, but also where we have to go. And then also YWCA, I will be speaking on our behalf. And so we're really going to have a conversation, and we have some twists and turns planned, and I think it's going to be a really great time and a way to learn more about how you can fit into that coordinated community response that we talked about earlier to really stop domestic violence and say, you know what, Fort Wayne has a standard, and that is we're not going to allow domestic violence here in our community.
Great speakers, and I will throw out the idea that if you're part of a women's group at your church, or a book discussion group, or and men can come to this too. This is a great opportunity to get together, to learn something, and to help your community. So I highly encourage you to attend. Okay, now we're winding up here. We have just about 13 minutes to go or so. little less than that. What numbers are key? Phone numbers are key for people to know to contact the YWCA.
Sure. So we have our crisis line, and that is a 1-800 toll-free number, and that number is 1-800-441-4073. That line is answered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You do not even need to share your information. So if you're worried like, oh, they might track my call or they might really get into my business, we'll ask you questions, but you only have to share what you're comfortable sharing. Everything that you share with us on that crisis line is confidential. So if the abuser calls our crisis line, or if your friend calls our crisis line to get information, we will not share anything with them through that line. If you can't remember the 1-800 number, another easy way to remember our crisis line is to dial 447-SAFE. And that's 447-7233, or if you can just remember 447-SAFE, that's another great way to reach out to us. You can also find us on Facebook, and so even if you wanted to do a message to us on Facebook, or of course visit our website, you certainly can do that as well. Just Google YWCA Northeast Indiana and we'll pop right up, and our website does have a quick escape feature, so if you're worried about your abuser tracking your social media, they would not be able to find that.
Okay, and if you find yourself in a situation where you need to flee quickly and have somebody pick you up, is that an option for people?
Yeah, so what I would tell people is a couple of things. You can either call those crisis line numbers, and then we're going to walk you through that process and get your transportation to our shelter, or you can always call law enforcement, and law enforcement does have a policy that they will transport to the shelter, no questions asked. So even sometimes women have a warrant out for their arrest, and they're afraid if they call the police to get safe shelter that they're automatically going to be taken to jail. Again, the policy is no questions asked. They're going to bring you in, and then we'll process things from there.
Okay. Now, you cover a 6-county area?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, 6 counties. Which 6 counties?
And so that would be Allen County and 5 of the surrounding, so Wells, Whitley, Huntington, Noble, DeKalb, and then Allen County.
Okay, and so if you live in one of the outer counties, how does one access the services then, besides the 1-800 number? Do you have people who go out into the counties and do programs? And
Yes, so we do have community-based case management where case managers can come and meet with that individual wherever they're at. We won't go in homes, as that's not safe for anyone involved.
Right.
But we will meet with individuals and provide them the same kinds of services that we would otherwise. So that's support of someone to talk to, but also help with navigating the legal system, help with finding resources. So maybe it's food resources, a new housing option other than shelter, maybe it is counseling, whatever service they might be seeking, we can try to help connect them with those resources, as well as, of course, the safety pieces of safety planning with that individual and trying to help them whatever way they need to leave that relationship or just to maintain safety for that time period.
okay. Now, I'm gonna throw you both a curveball here, because we didn't talk about this, but I'm curious. I want you each to say how long you've worked for the YWCA and what's the most interesting or important thing you've learned in working there.
Well, I've worked at the YWCA for 3 years, over 3 years now. For me, a big part of my job is working with youth, with teenagers and younger children as well. And I think the thing that is most impactful and important to me is just that potential that even if someone's in a bad situation, it doesn't have to be that way. There's always that hope of changing a little bit of their life situation. So maybe that individual is going through abuse within their family or abuse within their home, and maybe I'm able to plant a little bit of a seed to help them see what's going on and that it's not a good thing and that there are ways to get help. And so I love working with youth because there's just so much potential of, even if something is horrible right now, we can really turn things around for them and give them a much happier and safer future, or even just a safer next week, whatever that might look like.
Okay, Mary Jo.
Sure. So I first showed up at the YWCA in the Shelter and Outreach Program in 2003 as an intern, and I loved it so much I said, hey, I think I'll go back and see if I can get a job there. So here it is 9 years later that I've been employed at the YWCA in various different positions, and I think there's a few things that come to mind that I have learned along the way. Most recently, I have learned a lot about how domestic violence impacts the brains of children that have never even been in the same room where there was the domestic violence. So a lot of times we talk about that 10-year-old boy who's witnessing the domestic violence, and we know how that's going to impact him. But what about that baby that's in a crib all the way at the other end of the house, and the victim and the batter say, oh, it's a baby, they didn't hear what was going on. We now have research today in 2016 where neurologically that baby has changed just by one incident of domestic violence and just hearing their mother being beaten by their father. So I think that is something I've recently learned, and we have a long ways to go to change that. But I think the biggest thing that I have learned is how much domestic violence happens here in Fort Wayne in Northeast Indiana. And if you think about it, we're serving thousands of people. Police are serving thousands of people. But you know what? There are 20,000 more people out here in our community that are victims that are not ever getting the help that they need. And so I think the depth of it, people don't realize the depth of domestic violence and that we are here to help. And then lastly, I've learned, one, by working with and for and also serving, that women are so strong. YWCA predominantly has women employees. We predominantly serve women, and I've worked for some amazing women and alongside. And when it says YWCA, that W stands for women, and women really are strong. They have to take care of themselves, their family, their pocketbook. They have to take care of so much in the community, and the way to change that is to do more advocacy for women and lift women up into leadership positions so that we can have real change here at our local level, state and federal level.
And because of that, that means, ladies, you need to get out there and vote when it's an election year. You need to pay attention to the issues, and you need to get involved, which is why the League of Women Voters exists. I'd like to thank Jennifer and Mary Jo today. They have done a great job in talking about domestic violence and the issue both here and nationally. And I'd like to thank Eric and the staff at WELT 95.7 FM for giving us this time. They are supported by funds from the Friends of the Library. Friends of the Library, I'm a member. We encourage people to get out there and read, because reading helps your brain. And we also encourage you to help support entities like this, like the YWCA, like a number of the groups that were mentioned here earlier that work with domestic violence victims. And we hope you will continue to listen to these programs. If you have an idea of an issue that you would like to see us discuss, please go to the League of Women Voters Facebook page and send us a message that way, or you can go to our website at lwvfw.org, and you can send a message to me or any of the other officers via the website. We thank you once again.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you, and we hope you will tune in for other shows that we're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.